Welcome to the 2-month review. Actually, welcome to an old episode of the 2-month review. So, as you may know, if you follow the 3% blog or the 2-month review Twitter or Chad posts myself, my Twitter, we are going to be launching the next season of the 2-month review in May. And it will focus on the third volume of Rodrigo Fresan's amazing trilogy that consists of the invented part, the dream part, and now the remembered part. The Remembered Part is a giant and incredible book, very rich, very fulfilling in terms of summing up and completing the trilogy. But before we dive into it, it felt like a good idea to try and remind everyone what happened in the first two volumes. The very first volume, The Invented Part, was the very first season of the 2-month review. So to celebrate Rodrigo, to emphasize his importance to both Open Letter and this podcast and everything else, I thought we would rerun all of the episodes from the Invented Part season and the Dream Part season, giving anyone who hasn't heard them before a chance to listen to them, but also anyone who's interested in joining up in this next season, focusing on the third volume of the trilogy. This could be a good refresher. I personally think I need it. My brain is just mush these days. So enjoy your re-listen or first listen to all of these forthcoming 2-month review podcasts. Subscribe to us, like us on YouTube, like us on Apple or whatever you do there. You rate things, like us, follow us on Twitter. We're at 2-month review, and have fun. Rodrigo is a blast. His books are wild, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy all of this.
Big sky look down on all the people looking up at the big sky. Everybody's pushing one another around.
Welcome to 2-month review, the sort of sub-podcast of the 3% podcast, where we take one book, in this case The Invented Part by Rodrigo Fresan, and read it slowly over a 2-month period, talking about each individual section with various guests, and enjoying it, talking about it, going off topic on it, making jokes, and all those kind of things. This week, we're going to be talking about Life After People, or Notes for a Brief History of Progressive Rock and Science Fiction, which is pages like 361 to 405 or so.
Wrong. It's 363, Chad. Fact check.
Hey, 361 is where the title page is.
There's no page number on there. I'm going off of strict pagination. You're wrong.
361.
And that's going to be the theme of today's show. Fact checking. Being right and being wrong, because you know what? Facts matter in today's society. I'm letting you know that right now. 363, people.
To 403. And our guest, that is Brian, and this is Chad as always. And our guest this time, this is kind of weird, is Tom Roberge, who is from Riffraff Bookstore, also always on the 3% podcast. So
that's right.
It's very odd to welcome you.
Yes, but I mean, it's very obvious that I am a guest and that this is your guys' thing. Although when I listen, I feel sort of like, not that I'm going to start chiming in because I haven't read the entire book, so I don't want to talk to the podcast. It's a little weird. People talk to TV or whatever, but I do feel like I'm sort of in the room listening to you guys talk. I am so used to the sort of, the rhythm of the conversation sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's cool. That's actually the thing I was going to ask you about first, is that you've been listening to the podcast, but you only read this particular 40 pages from this book.
That's correct. When you asked me if I wanted to do this, I think it was in response to me saying that I'm a big Pink Floyd fan. And you said, okay, great, you can do this part. And then I was about to start reading it. And when I heard Jeremy in the second one, talk about he hadn't read any other, like the previous part, or didn't know where the book was going afterwards or anything like that, I was like, oh, fuck it. I'm going to stick to this. And so I've been listening, but as we were talking about before we started actually recording, because we're recording this with a couple that haven't been released to the feed yet, I'm unclear of specifically where the plot was in between. There's like 100 pages of plot, which, okay, Chad, you usually sort of summarize the plot here. Do you want to?
Right. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. So, and I'll address your question at the end. So for this particular section, the plot is, this is the first time that we go into a different character who has not been introduced, Tom, ironically, who is at home with his son after his marriage is broken up, and he's a huge Pink Floyd fan and 2001 fan, and he knew the writer in their youth. And in this chapter, all of a sudden his phone rings, and it is the writer who has merged with the God particle at CERN, the whatever that stands for. I can't even think of what it possibly stands for in Switzerland, where like the particle accelerator and so on and so forth. And this is the first time that there's been, so when you talk about the plot, there have been various hints along the way that something has happened to the writer and that they've somehow, you know, gone away, or something magical has happened that's like specific. They're everywhere but nowhere. The writer is gone off into this other world. And this is the first time that actually like is specifically referenced or told in story form. Now, what happens after this with the later chapters, we'll get to. But for now, this is exactly where everything is. And the parts that you skip that you haven't heard about yet are not, I mean, they don't really advance towards this in any like normal linear lockstep way. I mean, we've mentioned it every time, but all these parts were written simultaneously. So each one is sort of a standalone sort of attempt to address the writer at a different point in time. So you missed one where the writer is like 50 and going to the hospital, and then one that's like a bunch of notes that the writer has made about various books and about, books that he's read and the importance of books, and he sort of gives the framework of everything. And this is the first time that any of this has been introduced in any direct format. So in a way, you've not missed anything, but it just kind of accumulates as you go along.
Okay, so I have one question in response to that, because I think it's fairly obvious from this section that, yes, the writer character is sort of elsewhere. I mean, having not known the stuff about the particle accelerator sort of fusion actually having happened, I kind of assumed he was like dead or in the bardo or something like that. I was more curious about it's very hard to talk without spoiling, I suppose, but
no, you can spoil anything. Spoiler alert, whatever.
It's referenced that Penelope, who for clarity's sake, Tom, the narrator here, and Penelope sort of fell in love in their youth, or teenage years or whatever, and he refers to her as her first love and all of that sort of stuff. It's referenced that in adulthood she went crazy and maybe killed her children.
Yeah, pretty much. That is she's referred to as being the Mad Woman's sister in an early part of this book, in the second part. And then there's various allusions to what happens with her son. And Rodrigo, I don't remember how far the story gets in this book with that, but there's more coming, he said, in the future, in the next volume, in the third volume, that more explains that story. But yeah, that is an important detail here, is that the thing that the writer leaves Tom with is this memory of everything that happened with Penelope and her son. And that's sort of like this horrifying, like sad, emotional bit, which then leads to like, also spoil this, to like that last moment where Tom's like hugging his son and is very aware of that. So yeah, so that story has not been fully told yet.
Got it. Wait, I had a question about this, and now I'm forgetting it. Okay, I did have a question. So when you guys talked about the the Greek chorus sort of element to some of the previous sections. Mm-hmm. And now in this scenario, it is very clearly the voice of the writer from beyond. Was that always the case and it was never revealed, or does the Greek chorus sort of voice also change?
No, it was always this, but it was not quite revealed. Like, I mean, you knew it was, and you could tell that it was because it had certain self-referential elements. That was on the episode with Tom Flynn. There's one other time that this has occurred, and it was sort of clear because it references like, and the writer will come back from beyond talking in like American typewriter font, as it's in the American typewriter font. But it did serve. It wasn't so much that it was like a chorus or a separate voice, but it sort of served as one in that instance, because there was more. It was less of like, and here we have one long block of text where it's the writer telling things. And that one, all that was like interspersed. So, like, there was a narrative, and then it would jump in and like sort of explain something or add something to the story. So it worked differently, but it was the same voice.
Got it. Okay. Now I understand.
This is kind of fun. Like, you're going to ask us questions and I could try and make sure we know what the hell's going on.
No, wait, I don't listen to your other guys' podcasts. I tried to, but it was so dull and boring and lifeless that I couldn't just stick it out. But what are your credentials to even be talking to somebody like me and Chad? Let's first start with that. Who are you, Tom Roberge?
I could turn this around onto you, Brian, and ask you.
And I want like the LinkedIn version. I don't want this like who you actually are. Like,
Oh, the LinkedIn version.
Basically, Chad gave you a really shitty introduction. For people that may not know you, I seriously want them to know who you are.
That's true. That's fair point. Fair point. I did give you a shitty introduction.
Well, you didn't give me room to speak the way that Rachel got room. Also, I don't have a bio online, and I'm no longer on Facebook. I rejected LinkedIn all those years ago. Short bio. I worked in publishing for many years, partly as an editor at Penguin. I also worked for a public space, the literary magazine, Triple Canopy, the online literary thing.
Hey, could you get some of my stories into a public space? I love that magazine.
Sorry,
keep going. Keep going. Sorry.
I haven't worked there for like a decade.
Okay.
And then after that, I was at New Directions doing publicity and marketing, which is when Chad and I started the podcast. And then I sort of transitioned out of doing direct marketing and publicity to do sort of bookstore outreach. And then I left to go back into bookselling directly when I was working at Albertine, the French language bookstore in New York. And then I got sick of New York about a year ago and left to move to Rhode Island. Where I am now, trying my best to open a bookstore / bar.
It's a bed and breakfast?
Right.
You guys doing a BB and B, books, beds, and breakfasts. That's it. Hey,
and booze.
And booze. Quadruple Bs. Well, very cool. I'm honored to be the guest of the guest with Chad, to have you on here.
Right. And I suppose I should say that my taste skews not quite as esoteric and experimental as Chad's, but we have a lot of overlapping sort of taste in, Javier Marias and Pynchon and that sort of thing. So it's we're very, we talk about these things rather fluidly. We think everyone else understands them, but it's not always the case.
Which I was going to say, I think that this is a book that you would really like because it is so Pynchon and David Foster Wallace-esque. They're also, I forgot to mention this last week, maybe I did. All these are blurring together a bit, but Rodrigo translates Dennis Johnson into Spanish.
It's such a different style.
But he's invested in all of that kind of. He's very steeped in American literature and world literature of the sort that you tend to like as well. There's that. I assume I'm gonna pretend that I'm smart here and say that the reference on 396 to Timothy Artis is a Nabokov nod, and I know that the second volume of this is all Nabokov steeped, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. Wait, I was going to say something about this. I really, really, really liked the section I read. I will say I don't really get a Pynchon vibe. I'm not even sure I get a David Foster Wallace vibe. I get it feels Spanish in a weird way, which is not to say that it's like an insult. I'm just saying I think of other Spanish writers before I think of those other American writers for whatever reason. Maybe it's just a way that when you write in Spanish, when you try to do things like this, it just isn't the same as when, David Foster Wallace or Pynchon or anybody else who writes in that sort of, stream of consciousness sort of thing manages to put forth, at least the postmodern version of it.
I would say it feels like progressive rock, doesn't it? In a way. No, when I was thinking about it, this whole thing with Pink Floyd and being weird music, but still being accessible if you want it to be, or it can be mind altering if you want it to be. And it almost feels like less postmodern and more just kind of progressive, wanting to be progressive.
I was going to say before you answer that every section is completely different in the way that Infinite Jest builds through different voices and different techniques on every chapter is very similar to that.
No, it's very similar to the way Pink Floyd has a bluesy track and has a country track and but it all works. It's all theirs.
Next week is a Chekhov track. So I'm going to bring this back to Pink Floyd through the progressive rock moment. So you're a Pink Floyd fan.
I am. Yeah. I mean, in full disclosure here, because it doesn't really matter. I'm not trying to get a job with the government anytime soon. At about 15 years old, I had already gone back in time and I think because of bands like contemporary punk and whatever sort of alt rock, this is mid 90s.
Like Blink 182, the really good stuff.
Yeah. That's funny. Emma tries to make fun of me by saying that I'm a Blink 182 fan.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I hate Blink 182.
No, but like, Jane's Addiction, let's say. Like I discovered Jane's Addiction and then went back in time and like the Smiths and Jesus and Mary Chain and like all these other bands, and then somehow got back far enough to like Pink Floyd, and then coincidentally started doing acid and smoking a lot of pot at like 15 years old. And so doing those two things at the same time, like discovering this music. So like my memories of Pink Floyd and especially The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon are definitely tied into like a lot of drug use. And like,
fairly hazy then.
So look, I look back on it fondly. I don't regret any of those times. I mean, I do consider, those kind of drugs mind opening or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And the music sort of feeds into that. And, I think a band like Pink Floyd, like, look, in its, if you want to step back and be a cultural critic, like how much are they really saying about the nature of life? I mean, it's nothing compared to your average, very serious piece of literature. But when you combine the artistry of the music and the sort of shallow level philosophical sort of commentary that they're making, it's not worth nothing. I mean, I do think it's valuable to, especially to young people, to sort of get them to think more broadly about, existence and interrelations and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that's why I still look back fondly on, what Pink Floyd represented to me, and I still listen to it. I'm sorry, like I still love. Like,
why are you apologizing?
I was just playing it. I've been playing it all week since I've been reading this chapter.
I think people think of it as like cheesy. Looking back, I think people think of it as like cheesy, progressive rock, sort of like basics 101. That people make the assertion that like other bands were more complex and more sophisticated and all that sorts of thing. And,
like Rush
or like even King Crimson.
I was gonna say, so fucking King Crimson's playing here
at our jazz festival.
Yeah.
Because when I think of jazz, I think of like Robert Fripp, or whatever, or whoever the guitarist for King Crimson is. Very jazzy.
Weird. So weird thing about King Crimson, they never do drugs. They were not like into the whole drug scene. Like you listen to the music and you're like, oh god, these people were like some serious drug addicts.
It sounds like they're really into math. Everything sounds like a mathematical equation. It's crazy.
And it also seems like they read like Lord of the Rings, like
right,
multiple times. Yeah,
Fresán makes a joke about that here too, of like the prog rock as being like some sort of weird fantasy Tolkien thing, right. Whereas Pink Floyd really wasn't that.
No, they weren't. They were. I mean, they came out of what Pink Floyd version 1, and like slowly became version 2 when Sid vanished. And it didn't. They didn't just come fully formed this way. This is just sort of where their careers took them, right? Like it's sort of admirable that instead of like redoing the same album over and over, they were like, no, let's do something harder every single time. I like that.
Do you think, I'm just wondering, maybe I'm making a bad correlation here, but do you think with the way people view, like you were kind of saying, cheesy to, like Dark Side of the Moon and certain veins of progressive rock, do you think it's similar to the way people view fans of postmodern fiction or progressive fiction that is playful? Like, there's all those essays of like, if you like David Foster Wallace, you're one of those motherfuckers.
Yeah, which I think is a little unfair. Like, David Foster Wallace is actually difficult,
Yeah.
Like, George Saunders I don't think is difficult, but definitely falls in the same, broad literary category, right? Like, I would never say that about somebody who, professes their love for David Foster Wallace, unless they become, like, the lit bro sort of thing, which is definitely as well.
Lit bro.
But in terms of, Chad, we always talk about this. It's like the Murakami fanboys. It's like, like,
he likes baseball.
Oh, God.
He's like so baseline, like international literature, right?
Yeah.
Like the easy entryway. That's what I feel. But in reality, he's a very good writer. I just am not particularly intrigued by anything he does. I think
Tool's a very good band, but if you like Tool, you're one of those Tools or like Tool people. You know what I mean?
Well,
like.
There are other bands that do the similar thing, but much better.
Sure.
Right. It's weird because thinking back on it, like my Pink Floyd experience is pretty much similar to yours, drug related. But although I think one of the first things I heard was Dark Side of the Moon, and then immediately thereafter saw The Wall, and listen, and the movie The Wall, and then listen to the album The Wall. And I feel like that's not nearly as good as the earlier stuff before that, even post Sid. But like, I think that's where it sort of stopped becoming interesting to me. And if it all stopped right there, like looking back on it, if my memory is everyone in college getting high and watching The Wall and having some experience, that's not as interesting as like the thing that he's doing and relating to here in this chapter with Pink Floyd, of the Pink Floyd of Wish You Were Here, and the Pink Floyd of that era, and the way that sort of is more tied into like the Stanley Kubrick 2001 sort of vision and that kind of more grand opening of the mind and of what you can do with music.
I mean, I totally agree that like The Wall is not... even musically, it's not quite as sophisticated, but I still have a soft spot for The Wall because it is so like very anti-capitalist and anti-war
and gargantuan. Like
it is. It's like a serious undertaking, and I appreciate that. You don't really get concept albums anymore, you know. It's a real shame.
That's oh shoot, I can't make my joke. I'm gonna have to come back to that joke some other podcast. I'll remember, because I can't remember the name of the band right now, and it's not funny because I can't remember the name of the band. But yeah, I know what you mean, and I do appreciate that. I just think that like maybe culturally, like if anyone, we have interns in here who are young, they're in their early 20s, if that, and if they are familiar with Pink Floyd, it's probably through The Wall and through some dorm room, someone that they know that lives in a dorm listening to The Wall and Pink Floyd. They are nodding. So yeah, and I think that there's like all these early ones. Like I was listening to Adam Mother. Shoot, what is the name of it?
Adam Warlock? You just watched Guardians of the Galaxy. You're thinking...
I did. No, the Adam Mother album this morning, and that's really cool. And I haven't listened to the Adam Heart Mother. I hadn't listened to that in probably like 15 years, right? And I think that still stands up and is very interesting and is not tied to like the way that you could sort of like sort of stereotype people who listen to Pink Floyd. So like when you say like you sort of apologize for still listening to it, I think part of that to me is that if I were still listening to The Wall, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you know, I know that this is, you know, something that people listen in dorm rooms, but I think that all the stuff that he's referencing is actually really solid.
Yes. No, yeah. I agree. And I mean, look, they're a band with, I don't know how many albums, 17 or something like that. And they're going to have good ones and they're going to have bad ones, and that's fine, you know?
I had a very innocent kind of exposure to Pink Floyd. I was at the mall, and I was at Hot Topic, and I kept seeing the poster of the prism with the rainbow coming out of it. And I see it everywhere, and like all these like stoners are wearing it on their shirts and stuff. And I was like, what the heck is this? I was probably like 12 or something. And so I asked my dad about it, and he was like, oh, that's Pink Floyd, or that's Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. He's like, here, hold on. He pulled out the record and played it for me, and it was like, this might be one of the most amazing records ever. Holy cow, I can't believe I discovered this. Like I was the first one to ever listen to it or something. And I feel like Dark Side of the Moon is like one of these albums that kids are going to keep rediscovering over and over and over and over again.
I have no problem with that. I support that.
And I could see it being cheesy because it's like it's like the Bob Marley poster, you know, or something like that you see in college where it's like, it's freaking lame. Or, you know, the dark, it's like, warning, I smoke marijuana and I'm okay with that, sort of, you know, trigger warning poster in your wall or whatever. And yeah, I get that as being cheesy, but it's really good and it's kind of timeless. And I think Wish You Were Here is even better, and it's timeless and it's wonderful. And I just had a blast reading about it because it reminded me how much I like the albums. And I'm glad that Tom, even though it was a terrible name for the character Tom, I'm glad that he liked it as well.
I like the joke about Tom from Radiohead with the TH and the H that doesn't mean anything.
That's fantastic. I don't like Radiohead at all. So
cerebral palsy dancing, or however he... I was very offended by that. I laughed, but I was offended inside.
Epileptic dance. Yeah, no, that part is pretty awesome too. Are you a big 2001 fan too, Tom?
Yes, I love that movie. I like
one of those guys. All right.
I am.
Love that movie too. So this is the perfect time to be talking about this, because the last episode, since this is my I'm going to plug Twin Peaks: The Return within this podcast, is that this last episode had the most 2001 sequence that you would ever see outside of 2001. It went on for like 14 minutes.
Was there a pin floating in space and a lady comes by and plucks it from the air?
More or less.
Okay.
More or less. It went into the atom bomb and like went through all these various colors and transformations to the birth of like evil in the world, and was very much like a 2001 bit, which is perfect. Rodrigo's a huge fan of Twin Peaks, so we get a one plug a week.
All right. I haven't, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
So yeah, but you should, because it's fucking fantastic. So I don't know, did you notice that there's an error? So I've been told that this is not an error intentionally, but that in this section, and when it's talking about Wish You Were Here, it references that Wish You Were Here starts right at the end of Welcome to the Machine, which it doesn't. On the album, it starts right after Have a Cigar. And Rodrigo said that if you, he thought that you might point that out, is that it doesn't, that's wrong, and the book's wrong. But apparently this is explained in the third volume of this trilogy. So I'm just going to leave that here. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know anything more than that. The email is just that's all he said, was like, for anyone who's a super fan, they're going to point out that this is wrong. It's not a mistake. It's intentional.
Huh. Interesting. I hadn't noticed. I'm one of those people who like, I listen to like all Pink Floyd just on shuffle because I growing up listened to them in sequence so many times, like on CD, that I need to change it up a little bit.
I see. I like that, and that's kind of weird though too, because of like the concept album idea.
Yes, I mean for The Wall, it definitely helps to listen in order because they do blend together so much, and like even like a CD track, like they must have had a hell of a time trying to figure out like where to break it up.
Yeah,
because it's like, okay, now there's this thing that isn't song, it's just conversation. Do you put it at the end of this one or the beginning of the next one, and that sort of thing? And it's like skits on rap albums, right, where they're just doing whatever they do.
It's like the 18-hour movie that David Lynch handed in that they're cutting into episodes for Twin Peaks. Just to bring that back one more time, sorry. That one really did work, though. I did go past my limit.
That's cutting into next week now.
I screwed up.
You're in a debt now.
I'm down to zero.
Yeah. Your deficit here.
Some of the weird things. So have you guys seen Life After People?
No, I was like, aware of it, and I definitely, it was something that of course appealed to me as a reader of like, a lot of Philip K. Dick and sci-fi along those lines, where there's often just like the one guy trying to make sense of thing. But then I watched like one episode and the production was so like glossy and like Sci-Fi Channel. And the narration was so bombastic that I couldn't watch it.
Oh, really? I haven't seen it. I knew of it, but I thought it was just like a documentary of like taking one different, it was on the History Channel, like one different way of like what would this thing look like 50 years from now, 100 years from now, X number of years from now, so on and so forth.
Which is exactly why it sounds good. But then to think about that, I mean, all of it has to be computer generated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying.
And all of it looked not great, is what I will say.
Interesting. So, well, it also is from 2010 and 2009, which doesn't seem that long ago, but holy shit, I'll bet that seems like a million years ago in terms of like, special effects and CGI and all that crap.
Right.
It's like when you watch those dinosaur shows and it's like, oh, jeez, lame.
Exactly. That's what it felt like. That's a lot.
Not another slow-mo shot of a dinosaur looking up longingly as a asteroid is going to come kill them. They all like put their heads up like gophers and, see the asteroid coming to kill them.
I believe that's actually that movie Dinosaurs that you're talking about.
Oh, Land Before Time?
Land Before Time,
oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
I do like okay, so this is one going back for anyone who's been reading along or listening along, is that there's the reference in the Penelope section that Tom Flynn was on where it referenced her finding all the diamonds and that she was out in the sand in the desert area and there's all these diamonds. And she's like, well, that's happened before in this place. And I liked how that actually came back here and explained that in Kolmanskop that there were all these diamonds there. And I was like, well, this is probably bullshit. And I looked it up and that's absolutely true. There were all these, they did just find diamonds on the ground essentially in this one particular area, so they mined them all and then like abandoned that area, and that was like one of the things that's used in Life After People, and I think that's pretty cool to like to bring back like something that was referenced way earlier in the book and explain sort of that plot point, or to like ground it a little bit, and at the same time that this is really a thing that happened in the world.
Yeah, I felt like this particular section, and I could be wrong about it, but this one felt like almost everything that was in here was something that happened in the world, and it didn't feel like there was a lot of fiction. It was just his creative way of presenting actual things. Is that not how the rest of the...
I can see that with the exception being the creation or the character Tom, and like the one part where like all the parts about him, Tom, and Penelope and the writer as kids and their like love of science fiction, that rings very close to The Bottom of the Sky, the next Fresán book that's coming out. It's not exactly the same, but it does like hint towards that, which is pretty interesting too. Because he does have that thing of like a lot of characters, a lot of scenes, a lot of like sequences or ideas. Those come up in his other books. So they are not linked, not like Terry Pratchett's Discworld or anything like that, but something, where they are talking to each other. Also, I've never read Terry Pratchett. I have no idea if that's a true thing. I'm just making that up.
Dude, there's an army that'll kill you if you don't like Terry Pratchett, by the way.
It's not like George R.R. Martin. No one likes him.
They wear safari hats. They breathe heavily from their mouth.
Right.
And they will come kill you after they're done playing D&D.
This was, to contrast this with last week's episode, which you haven't heard yet, Tom, but last week was a lot of these frame puzzle pieces was the sort of analogy that they came up with. And this is one where it is a lot of like the truth or the things that happened and then bringing them into this setting that's already been created by the previous like 4 parts of the book. And last week was kind of the opposite.
Okay. Interesting. Because, we also got the story in here about like Sid showing up at Abbey Road during the...
Yeah.
Like a lot of this is just... There's a documentary on YouTube about Sid and Pink Floyd specifically, instead of like the bigger, broader documentary, which... oh God, I watched that one too. I think it's called "Which One's Pink," which is from Have a Cigar, right?
Yeah.
Where that record producer in the middle of Have a Cigar, there's like he's relating a conversation they have with a record promoter or whatever, and the guy says, "By the way, which one's pink?" Anyway, so there's this other documentary in which this whole story is sort of laid out and explains that when Sid came back and all this sort of stuff. So for like real Pink Floyd fans, like a lot of what's in this chapter is already known. But I can see the desire he would have to sort of relate it in this sort of way, because it makes Tom's sort of relationship to it interesting and Tom's relation to the writer more interesting. There's like a weird world building that happens even within this one part that's interesting.
And there's like the way that we relate to each other through art. Like I remember the friends of mine that were Pink Floyd fans. Like even when we first started talking about this and I was trying to remember back to like when I first heard Pink Floyd, it is 3 specific people. And it is them that they were friends with, and we listened to Pink Floyd together. And like in this, they use that 2001 even more so than Pink Floyd, I suppose, of like that they kept going and seeing that movie, and like and that was their kind of like touchstone. That there is that kind of way that people interact with each other.
Yeah,
and then there's like all the stuff with like there's so much stuff in the past few sections about the relationship between fathers and sons or parents and children, and that all comes home here in like a few slight moments, which is pretty typical of the book in a lot of ways, in which like the meaty emotional core isn't dwelt upon the way it is in like a normal, conventional, straightforward book that whomever that like a regular, whatever you want to say, regular normal book that comes out, where most of it is like, here's an emotional content after emotional content, and let's explain and explore this emotional content. And this has a lot of the like when they're divorced and like the son goes away and he comes back every other weekend and occasionally leaves the little cards under the pillow. Those are like 4 sentences. Like you could boil down the emotional relationship between Tom and his son and the sadness that sort of ends this chapter into like a paragraph. And the rest of it is everything that kind of comes around that, or like that leads to that creation or that being emotional, rather than like a normal quote unquote, air quotes, whatever book that is more of just the emotional part and none of the like how this comes to be emotional part.
Did you take cocaine today? You're like talking super fast, dude.
Probably just a little bit.
All right. I want to respond to what you just said by saying that I think the ways it's dawning on me now why you think this might be like David Foster Wallace is that Wallace is good at getting the, point A to point Z sort of mishmash path that we all have when we encounter something in the world that is based on a previous experience sort of thing, and all the crazy thoughts that go through your head. And so what we get here is Tom trying to just have an educational sort of, bonding moment with his son. But of course, as he mentions Pink Floyd, this wave of memories comes back and is connected to other things. And he's trying to make sense of it all in like the split second in which he tries to explain, like in which he hands his son a shrink wrapped box set, and I think it's an incredibly beautiful, brilliant thing to be able to like successfully get onto the page. And it does, I think what it accomplishes is just showing just how interwoven and complicated not just our relationship to art, but our relationship to other people is. And then it's never just the straightforward, like, oh, I know this person and I've met this person and we have this in common and this is what we talk about. It's like, clearly there's a million things feeding into every moment of every interaction. And that's what he's trying to sort of recreate on paper, even though that's quite a monumental challenge.
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, I mean, I guess that is part of it. The David Foster Wallace thing is more of like an awareness and less of like an homage to or a replication of. But the other thing is maybe this whole chapter, I mean, it all is just the phone ringing. I think that's the only present moment in this chapter. For my recap thing, might be it.
Well, no, the phone rings and then he goes and gets the box set and gives it to his son.
I thought that was referring to earlier.
Oh, is it?
I think now that I think about it.
Oh, right. So he's home by himself. You're right. He's remembering his son's visit from the past weekend.
Yeah, I think all of that's part of the memory, and the phone is just rang, and then all the stuff from the writer is basically imposed into his mind, which brings into like all the questions of like the reality of this and like what is real, because the science fiction thing and like the idea that it's science in fiction, not so much science fiction, and like sort of a nod towards these ideas, that sort of plays into that it's all in his mind at that moment, and really all that's happened is the phone rings.
Right, and then he gets that monologue or whatever you want to call it,
right,
from the writer.
The part that really connected with me on this was I liked how there's friends and then friends lost, and obviously that works perfect with Syd Barrett like disappearing, going mad or whatever and coming back and being unrecognizable, and you see that with the writer here. But it just reminded me, it was like as a kid there was like this shorthand way of like knowing who your friends were, like for instance Pink Floyd in 2001 A Space Odyssey, or like for me I got into Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Like if somebody liked the movie Brazil, like I knew we could probably be friends because there's a certain number of like ways that you have to see the world in a certain way to really enjoy this, and if it's a shorthand or like a litmus test, like I'm gonna date this girl and I'm gonna show her Brazil, and if she hates it I'm gonna break up with her because it won't work. Nowadays we just use Twilight or something like. But I like the way like there was these little touchstones of like friendship with like if you can be down with 2001 A Space Odyssey, if you can be into Pink Floyd with me, like it's. And it does. This is gonna go off. And then I'll bring this back to like something more mundane. But it does also seem like it has that tension of you have the ways that you connect with other people through these artworks or the touchstones. There's the idea of Sid going away and losing his mind, and the band continuing, and you have like, and that sort of like that almost has that kind of like friendship loss, splitting up thing that's going to happen. In 2001, a lot of is the like advanced in the civilization to the point where it has to be reborn because it goes out into like that never land through Dave's final like mystical weird journey, right? And that ties into the life with that after people part where like things just fall apart. Everything just is going to crash eventually. So you have these like little pieces that you can hold on to that create these friendships, that create these emotional moments, and then the rest of it is that time passes very fast and for a very long time, and everything sort of ends.
I was waiting for the quote, "Bring it back."
Okay, so bring it back is when Tom Flynn was on here, we talked about Murder, She Wrote and remaking Murder, She Wrote. And I saw him this past weekend in Chicago, and he said that his wife listened to the wrong episode Or I think it was maybe the one before that we talked about remaking Murder, She Wrote. And she listened to the wrong episode, and we were saying, like, oh, it'd be great if you remade Murder, She Wrote. And she's like, it is the show Castle. The show Castle is Murder, She Wrote. Like, it's exactly the same thing with a male writer. And I was like, oh, okay, fair enough.
Who watches Castle? First off. I've never seen Castle, but I know it's the dude from Firefly, right?
Yeah.
Or is that Bones?
No, I think it's the dude from Firefly.
They're the same show, but just with different specialties, I'm sure.
But apparently Castle is a guy who is a writer who solves mysteries. Yes. And writes about, and it's the same show.
Yeah, but it'd be way better with Sarah Jessica Parker.
All right. It ran for 7 years, which is a lifetime of Network TV. And on top of that, it is an 8.2 out of 10 on IMDb.
What?
What does Castle or Murder, She Wrote?
No, Castle.
Oh.
That's insane.
That's it. People loved this show. Wow.
So apparently we are stupid for not knowing this.
I don't know anything. Is it one of those shows on the WB? Because I don't watch that shit.
I guess she was like on the L train in Chicago, just being like, "Those dummies! Like, what the hell is wrong with them? It's Castle."
You know what? Fair enough.
We're talking about Castle.
I have got a huge gap in my knowledge, and it is a Castle gap.
That's fair.
Among others.
I have one. That's fair.
All right, I just want to bring this back to just something dumb and nerding out for a second.
Right on.
Nothing to do with the book, but like they're talking about sci-fi and stuff, and I love the sci-fi genre. Like, what are your guys' favorite? Do you have a favorite sci-fi film? I mean, that's not 2001: A Space Odyssey, because everybody could put that as like their number one, obviously, if they want to, and no one can argue with it.
Dune, no.
David Lynch.
That was just a joke. Okay. Oh God.
Does Brazil fit into this category? Because
I think it totally should.
Brazil fan.
Yeah, Brazil. Then
see, I knew I liked you, Tom. Like we fit on all these touch points I was talking about. Pink Floyd. Brazil, there's like a certain type of person that likes books and is cool, and I'm working on being that.
Alien. I'm a big fan of the Alien franchise.
Wow, so. All of them, or just the first one?
The first two are phenomenal.
Aliens, if you look back, Aliens is pretty lame though. I know it's like 100% movie because it's it's like Space Marine. It's just I don't know. It's just like a dumb James Cameron movie, which he does perfectly. He's very good at that. But they just like kind of slapped aliens on like wallpaper on the front of it.
You mean the second one?
Yeah, Aliens.
Right.
Yeah, Aliens. I mean, Aliens. I prefer Alien, the original, to
that one's like a thriller, intense, right? And the other one's an action film.
I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's great.
I like Aliens too. I agree, but
like everyone always says Blade Runner. I don't know. I was never really that into Blade Runner.
Well, you have to figure out which version. Do you like the 9th version, the 10th version, the 12th cut?
That's true.
Yeah, that's the other problem.
It's been so long since I've seen that.
Have you guys ever seen this? One's going to go back. I really like this is one my dad turned me on to. It's called Forbidden Planet.
It sounds really familiar.
I think it's from the late 50s, early 60s. Like it's like the super cheesy sci-fis.
Right.
But if you get a chance, check out Forbidden Planet. It's actually pretty awesome.
I mean, the name, it's like one of these famous movies, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a classic for the sci-fi genre, but it's way before our time, by all means.
So not Star Wars or Star Wars Rogue One?
No.
Naked Lunch? Does that count?
Oh man, I love Peter Weller. I will watch anything with Peter Weller in it. So absolutely, RoboCop. He was in a movie called Screamers, or I think it was a Philip K. Dick short story. Maybe not.
That one I don't know.
I'm gonna get yelled at again by an L Train person for that, but whatever.
Tom's wife, if you're listening, please send your screeds. just keep them coming.
I'm sure she only listened to the one Tom was on. Right?
Yeah, but it was the wrong. Whatever it was not his one. She downloaded the wrong one and listened to that, and then got mad at us for being stupid. So
there you go.
Yeah, that's.
I never claimed to be smart, so I'm okay with being stupid. That works for me.
Are you talking about? Wait, no, that's Scanner Darkly. He wasn't in that.
Oh, Keanu Reeves was a fabulous voice actor.
I actually never saw that movie because I heard that it was so bad.
It's weird.
No, it's really good.
Is it?
It's like this weird animation.
Yeah.
Is it rotoscope?
Got animation, but wow, it's so like emotional.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really liked it.
Okay. I for some reason I had the impression that everyone disliked that version, so I just never watched it.
All right, so I had a fun when you have to do a sci-fi, people like to nerd out with continuity errors or very slight problems. On page 385, he throws the bone into the air. That's the real famous transition where it turns into he says a spaceship, but it's actually a weapons satellite. Yeah, because it's supposed to transition from the weapon, using the bone as the weapon, and then a weapon in space.
That's true.
It could technically be a spaceship, but it actually is a weapons satellite.
Maybe that's going to be one of these things that's explained in the third part too.
So 385, I had a problem with that. There was another problem where he calls Planet of the Apes. He says there's monkeys. There's no monkeys in Planet of the Apes. There's chimpanzees and gorillas. So that's important to point out because these words do matter. There's millions of years of evolution between monkeys and chimpanzees. So,
oh man,
throwing that out there.
I wonder sometimes. I do think that some of this is like intentional with those things because at least he referenced the one very specifically, being like FYI.
I'm obviously being facetious.
I know.
I don't give a shit about any of that.
Okay, in that vein, like of this intentional stuff, I have a something to mention here that I know is probably most likely not intentional, but which caught my eye nonetheless, which is, so when the phone rings and he hears the voice, when he picks it up or whatever, and so we hear him say, remember when you were young, the opening line from Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And then we get the aside that lasts almost the entire section of like 35 pages. And then it comes back around and he says the next line, which is, your eyes shone like the sun. Now, the word for sun in Spanish and the word for son as in like a biological son, the male offspring of someone, are clearly not homonyms in Spanish, but they are in English. And I thought that made it very interesting that, one, there's the whole specter of Penelope killing her son, I think, but then spending this whole time talking about Pink Floyd to his son. And it all sort of tied together in that way, at least in English, right? You've got this thing working. But then it dawned on me, I was like, oh, wait, this is a translation. Like, that's totally unintentional. That wouldn't have been in the original Spanish. So
that's very true. That is very cool. And that is another part of the sun thing of like teaching the passing down of artworks too. Like, don't you, in a way, like we all sort of referenced this, but you all got sort of indoctrinated into Pink Floyd through someone else.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was just like older kids though.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It was older kids for me too, but it was older kids.
Yeah, like my dad was a Bob Dylan. We've talked about this on our other podcast.
Well, Bob Dylan's coming.
Bob Dylan all the time, every day. I remember asking my dad if he knew who the Velvet Underground was, and he looked at me and said, "Who is that?" And I was like, "You were like a teenager when this was happening, and you have no fucking idea who Velvet Underground." Like, to me, it's like this seminal thing. He had no idea.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is kind of surprising.
It is kind of weird. But then, you've heard the thing from Brian Eno, right? Like 10,000 people bought that album and all of them made it. All of them joined a rock band right after. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Well, it wasn't like some super, Velvet Underground didn't top the charts the way Pink Floyd did. So
very true. So since we're running a bit long, I know you've got to get going. What's your favorite quote from this section, Tom?
So there was one that I liked that has to do about prog rock. And it struck a chord with me for reasons I'm not really going to get into, or if you want to talk about my childhood. But so it's on 376, and he's talking about like the history of Pink Floyd 1, Pink Floyd 2, and, the whole new wave thing that was going on sort of concurrently and all of that sort of stuff. And he's sort of shooting down bands like, Rush and other things like that. And says, for Tom, true progressive rock was what had transcended all of that, and what was now, was progressing, moving in a new direction and readying itself to no longer be the rebel music of clever teenagers leaving home in search of new and more powerful emotions, but the music for kids who had an excess of new and powerful emotions at home already. Which I think is very true, or at least in my case. That was,
we all have that underlined.
Really?
Yeah, I do as well.
I can see, because Brian's next to me. I can see his book and my book. The same thing.
The one note I liked about that in particular, and I just thought it'd be kind of fun to circle it back around to David Foster Wallace, is I remember when he wrote, I heard something he was talking about writing Broom of the System. And he said he felt like Broom of the System was like a book that was written by a very clever teenager. And I like that this talked about progressive rock being for kind of like, smart, clever teenagers and like angsty and pushing out. I don't know, it just kind of tied it all together for me. I thought it was a great quote. I'm glad you picked that one.
Do you have a different one that you want to go with, Brian?
No, I'll stick with that one.
Okay.
I think it works.
Then I'll end on the side note. Oh, damn it. There were two that I had. Oh, now I can't choose between the two. I'm just going to go with both if I can find the second one.
How about I like the part where he says, when the son says, "Dad, what does biblical mean?" He says it has something to do with bad news. When, like the New Testament, the gospel is actually translated good news. So I thought it was kind of interesting. That's funny.
That is funny. There's one that I can't find it anymore because I don't know why it's not marked in here. But there's a one bit that I liked where it says something like, "There's nothing as sad as a disillusioned author, Major Tom," which I really like just because that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But the one that I really like is the last line because it is so sad. Sitting on the edge of the little bed, he holds his son to keep from falling.
Oh, that's good.
Which is all good times.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for being on. We called out to 7 or 8 Toms, and you were the first to get back to us, and so we're very happy. Tom Berenger said no. He says, "I don't work anymore," which I don't think he's not even direct to DVD anymore, I don't think.
Probably true.
Tom Selleck was too busy hunting elephants or shooting something endangered with the NRA. Tom Hayden Church was working with Sarah Jessica Parker on HBO.
Making new Murder, She Wrote.
I don't know any other Toms besides those 3.
The first one I think of is Tom Glavine. That's
Glavine.
Horrible.
But
yeah,
Tom,
I'm definitely like F-list Toms in the room. It's fine. I think I can get.
Oh man. So I guess we should do like the normal thing of like if you're listening to this now, go rate us on iTunes, rate everything. We will. I say this now, which I didn't say earlier, is that right now the 2-month review podcasts are under the 3% podcast feed. There will be a duplicate of that. That's its own feed starting in a day or two, depending on how long it takes iTunes to like whatever, make it okay, approve it. So you can follow that. You can also always follow us at ChadW Post on Twitter. It's just, wait, what is yours, Tom? It's not Tom Roberge.
New Directions quitter.
No. It's the Tom Roberge, which comes from, in case anyone ever wondered why I do that, it's from Ohio State, which goes to the Ohio State University.
Are you from Ohio State?
I went to Ohio State.
Oh, God. I take back all the touch points. You suck now. Oh, the Ohio State.
I thought that was probably why, but I don't. Yeah, but we
That's
also
good.
live in a world in which no one else watches sports. So
That's good, though. I like that. The Tom Roberge.
Yeah.
And I'm at DogFancy44. So hit me up.
follow that one, and you can always. There is a Goodreads group which you can find on all the posts for this, and there are people that are talking in there about all the things that they like, questions they had. They have a question that I didn't get to, we'll get to next week, which is basically like, because there are 60 pages out of this book, where were they added? And the answer is basically everywhere. Like there were sentences throughout. It was not like one continuous section. There's just like in this different lists and different rants, he added in a few sentences, a few paragraphs. So we'll talk about it more in a future section. But for now, that's probably good. Cool. Thanks, Tom. Go have fun in Boston.
I will. As much as I can.
As
Thank
much
you.
as one can.